So sitting or standing outside on the mountain ridge outside the restaurant Gochula this morning, looking up at the mountains, I'm reminded again just why I love being out in nature so much. One of the reasons is that in cities, in towns, almost everywhere we look, we see things that are man-made. And many of the things that we see around us very easily, if we're not very mindful, aware, can be objects of desire. So apart from the shop windows and the advertising hoardings in towns which are stimulating desire, then pretty well wherever we see beauty, it can give rise to things like, oh, I wish I had one of those, or maybe one day I could have that if I work very hard, or if I'm very lucky, or if I win the lottery, or if the deities will help me. But one of the great values of being in the middle of the countryside or in the mountains is all around you see breathtaking beauty, but there's not a single acquisitive thought in your mind. You never think, oh, that beautiful mountain, I wish I could have one of those. I wish I could one day I'll have enough money to buy myself a forest or a mountain. And I think it's a very healthy experience for us to be in the midst of great beauty and experiencing pleasure and happiness on account of that beauty in the complete absence of any desire to grasp and to make one's property. And it is a very simple truth that we can separate in our minds in certain circumstances, that appreciation and enjoyment of things from the desire to grasp onto and hold onto. Also, reflecting this morning, another aspect of that landscape and environment is how utterly indifferent it is to human beings. And I was reminded when I was a teenager, one of my favorite authors was an American writer called Kurt Vonnegut. And in one of his books, one of the heroes or the characters comes to the conclusion that a lot of the wars and the conflicts in the world are caused by people who profess religions and which lead them to understand that God is on their side. So this is particularly true in Europe. In the First World War, you see the British side in the trenches would be fighting for God and the King, and the Germans would be fighting for God and the Kaiser, and everyone thought God was on their side. And so in this book, the hero establishes a new church, and it's called the Church of God the Utterly Indifferent. And the idea is that some world peace would be developed when everybody believed that the holy principle, God or whatever, couldn't care less, and doesn't take people's sides in wars or in any kind of competition. And I think that again, I think it's a healthy, very healthy for us as human beings to be in situations where we're not looking for assistance and aid and expecting it to be living in a situation where it's indifferent to us. And to survive in nature, you have to have respect for nature, and you have to study, you have to understand. If you're out in the mountains alone, it's not, you have to know how to look after yourself, what kind of clothing you need, how to orient yourself, how to live off the land if it should come to that. There are so many do's and don'ts, not as sort of rules of morality imposed upon you from outside or by some deity, but because with nature being like this and a human body being like this, if the human body is to survive in those kinds of conditions, it must adapt itself appropriately. And this is very much a Buddhist understanding of life in general, that we grow and flourish as human beings to the extent in which we study, we understand the way things are, and we adapt ourselves appropriately. So as human beings, we often tend to be rather conceited and arrogant, I think, and overestimate the extent to which we are masters of the world we live in, and we are able to control and manipulate things. If we look very closely, our efforts at manipulation and control are always very tightly constrained within the boundaries given us by nature. A very simple example, let's say you wanted for some reason to hold your breath. Now as an act of will, you can do that, can't you? You can make a decision, I'm going to hold my breath. And you hold your breath, but after a few, some seconds or maybe a minute or two, even though the will to hold your breath might be there, you might be underwater, for instance, there comes a point where nature won't allow you to hold your breath anymore. And that's I think a paradigm or a leading example of many situations in life where, because we can exert a certain amount of control, we become intoxicated by that, and we give it far more importance than it deserves, and we forget the fact that we can only manipulate things because nature allows us to, and we can only manipulate things within the boundaries or the constraints that nature provides us with. So I've been speaking for some time now, both here and on my visit to Bhutan and in Thailand generally, on the particular nature of the Buddha's teachings, and proposing the idea that it is essentially an education system rather than a belief system. It has significant differences from the great faiths that grew up in the Middle East. And that I don't think that in the laudable name of harmony and tolerance, that we should overlook the unique features of Buddhism. For instance, I was reading the other day that the Pope had announced an interfaith meeting in Italy, I suppose, in which it was the idea was to face up to religious intolerance and misunderstandings and try to find some common ground. And the common ground for the Pope and for many people throughout the world is basically we all believe in God, and we just talk about it in different ways. And that puts Buddhists in a very difficult position, because we don't want to be the wet blankets and the people the party pooper and the one that doesn't support these efforts to create world harmony. But at the same time, as a Buddhist monk myself, I certainly don't believe that we all believe in the same God and that there's one ruling deity that's called different things by different people. So in the very, I think in the most polite and friendly way, the Buddhist view here, and I'm speaking on behalf of Buddhism, perhaps if that's permitted to me to do so, and I would say that most of the interfaith initiatives are based upon the idea that we can only really be friends when we agree that we're all talking about the same thing. Whereas my understanding is that we can have completely different ideas about some things and we can still respect each other. Why can't we be friends just because we don't see eye to eye on certain things? So to fully gain the benefit of Buddhist teachings and with avoiding the trap of chauvinism, saying that we're better than superior to other religions, I think it is very worthwhile to really look at those features that we find in Buddhism that are not found in other religions, and which are the basis for our own confidence and satisfaction that this is the religion that I've chosen and pleases me the most. The Buddhism is an education system, and in the text, one of the ways of referring to a fully enlightened being is called an aseka pugala, which means, we might say, the graduate. He's a graduate. He's someone who no longer needs to study or to learn. So the idea that we can get from that, of course, is that short of a fully enlightened being, everybody is still learning. And the Buddhist approach to life is that we are learning, and that we grow and that we fulfill ourselves as human beings most essentially through making use of this wonderful ability we have to transform ourselves, to take responsibility for our lives. That we see when we look very closely, and this is not an article of faith, I think we can see very clearly that we do have within us this capacity to change in quite radical and fundamental ways. At the same time, recognizing that change, which in the long term may well be a radical change, is one that often happens in a very slow and gradual way. I believe, in fact, it's a Tibetan saying, I could be mistaken, but referring to the way one approaches Buddhist practice and teaching is the idea of hurrying slowly. And there's a nice little story from, I'm not sure where, about a man at the countryside taking a cartload of coconuts into the market in the town for the first time, and not too sure of the best road to take into town, and asking a young boy why the road, and he said, like, he's worried that he's going to get too late to sell his coconuts. So he asked the young lad, how long taking this road here, how long will it take to get to the market? And the boy said, well, if you hurry, it'll take you an hour, and if you go slowly, it'll be about half an hour. And the man thought, oh, what an impertinent young boy. He's got angry. And so set off as fast as he could down the road. And of course, the road was very pitted and rutted, and a number of potholes in the road. And he got halfway down the road, and the cart overturned. And so he had to pick up all the coconuts and put them back on the wagon. And by the time he got into the market, it was an hour had passed. whereas other carts which knew the nature of the road had gone a lot more slowly and carefully and got there in half an hour. So when you hear that the first time, if you hurry it'll take an hour, and if you go more slowly it'll take half an hour. It doesn't make sense, but in real life it does. And in Buddhism we talk about the middle way, but the middle way is not always the straightest way. Or if you're going to from Thimphu to Punakha, I say, which is the straightest route or the best route, and you're told, and you get on that road, and the road is winding all the time. I thought this was the fastest way. Yeah, sometimes the fastest way, it does wind a lot, but it's still the most effective and efficient way to get to your destination. So, as Buddhists were saying that if we have a faith in Buddhism, it's not a faith in external deities so much as a faith in our own capacity for transformation and our own capacity for enlightenment. And the Buddha made it very clear from the very beginning of his dispensation that this capacity, this potential for enlightenment is shared by both men and women. And with regards to this faith, we can begin with a certain amount of inference to give us some confidence in this principle. And to do that, we can look at our life and ask ourselves, can we identify any bad habit or any really foolish activity that we indulged in the past, which today we are free of, which we've let, perhaps in the past we used to smoke cigarettes or be abusive of people around us, or whatever it might be. And then we see, yes, these days that's no longer a part of my life, or it's much less a part of my life than it was. And similarly, can we see any good, virtuous quality in ourselves these days that was absent a few years ago? Now, I think in both cases, I would think everyone would be able to say, yes, I can see that within myself. And the next step, and this is admittedly logic rather than intuitive insight, but the logical step is, well, if I could abandon that particular bad habit, then why can I not abandon all the other bad habits which are still present in my mind? If I have developed this particular virtuous quality, then why can't I develop all the other virtuous qualities? So the Buddha is saying that change takes place according to causes and conditions. And if we study nature of causes and conditions and apply ourselves intelligently, we can realize or we can abandon the unwholesome, develop the wholesome, and purify our minds. And indeed, on one occasion, the Lord Buddha said to the monks that the Lord Buddha, the Tathagata, is teaching you to abandon all that is unwholesome and develop all that is wholesome, is because it is something you can do. If you couldn't do it, I wouldn't teach it. Now, I've always found this a very, very powerful statement from the Buddha. So, let me just say a few more words about faith in the Buddhist tradition, at least in the tradition in which I've trained. Faith is not denigrated in Buddhism. In fact, it's considered one of the key spiritual faculties. So it is referred to as a power or a faculty. But in all of the Pali texts in which faith is mentioned, it is always accompanied. It usually appears in different kinds of lists of virtues and tools to be used on the path, and it's always accompanied by wisdom. So wherever the word sattva or faith appears, there's always the word panya or wisdom. And the Buddha taught us that these two qualities have to be balanced. So faith without wisdom very easily becomes fanaticism or superstition. And similarly, intelligence, the critical faculty, without faith can very easily turn into this sort of cynical, critical ability to see the fault of everything and the value of nothing. So faith is what simplifies and clarifies and focuses the mind. I don't know in Bhutan whether you've ever watched American TV series. I don't know where it's even going these days, called Star Trek, and one of the key characters is this man with pointy ears called Mr. Spock, and he doesn't have emotions. He's always very logical, and so he's a foil for the captain, who's very passionate and human. But then there's this idea that if you don't have any emotions, then you would be extremely effective in your career. But there are many people, and not many, but there are a number of people who through car accidents or some trauma have suffered damage to their brains, and they become completely emotionless, Mr. Spock characters. They don't have emotions anymore. So it's very interesting to observe how they function in the world. And in fact, surprisingly, they become, sadly, very dysfunctional. For instance, going to the supermarket is a major expedition, because when they have to choose between a number of brands which are almost essentially the same thing, and their only criteria is the logic of which brand is better than the other one, they just find it almost impossible to make decisions. So faith is important here. It's when you've weighed up a certain amount of evidence, you've spent a sufficient amount of time, then you have to go for it. You have to make your choice, and that's the role of faith. It clarifies things and enables you to make choices, but it has to be tempered by, balanced by this critical faculty and questioning. And the Buddha referred to his teachings as ehipasika, which means come and see, or in other words, these are teachings that challenge you to put them to the test. They're not teachings that must be accepted and believed in, because once you have that kind of attitude that it's sinful not to believe in holy teachings, and that if you don't understand and you can't make any sense, that's your problem. That's alien to the Buddhist tradition, and many cases the Buddha praised people who doubted. The most famous occasion was when he visited a group of people called the Kalama people. The Kalama people lived in an area probably somewhere near present-day Delhi, and they were very well known for being very intelligent, thoughtful people. And some of the Kalama people said to the Buddha, there's so many spiritual teachers these days and so many teachings, and they all sound so plausible, and the teachers are all so articulate and charismatic, and how do we make a decision? We just don't know who to believe anymore, and how to make any kind of decision about which teachings to follow. And the Buddha said, very good, That's you are doubting about something which is deserving of doubt. So this is a clear case where the Buddha recognizes that doubt is often a sign of intelligence. And communicate, you know this often when academics write papers and they use this very difficult language, all these very difficult words, and it's very easy for a non-academic to become intimidated and assume that because you can't make head or tail of it, it's because it's too profound. But very often it's because it's very poorly expressed. And if you were to rephrase it in what they said in ordinary everyday language, then you could see the flaws in the arguments, or even the strengths of the argument much more clearly. But this idea that profundity is identical with complexity, I think is a very mistaken idea. And one characteristic of all the great teachers is that they are able to present difficult ideas in a clear, accessible way. Albert Einstein, whom we count as a great teacher in his own right, he was sense that it's important to make things as simple as possible, but no simpler. So it's not a matter of dumbing down or glossing over the more difficult parts of the subject, but in those areas which can be simplified, to be simple as possible, not to be showing off your language or the books you've read or the people that you know, and the long multi-syllable words that you've memorized. But your goal is communication. And the Buddha was, the great communicator, and all the great spiritual teachers have been communicators, I believe, in that way. So we're studying his teachings, and faith is tempered by the willingness to question in a very humble and respectful manner, but not to feel that is wrong. And it's very good for monks and for teachers to be challenged. I like it myself. I don't know about maybe other monks, but I like it when people say, no, I don't agree, or that doesn't make sense to me. Because if you're part of a tradition, and a tradition that goes back a long, long way, as I am, then you absorb things and you take things for granted, and they make sense to you to the extent that sometimes you don't ever stop and say, but yes, but what's that really about? Because everybody else has the same standard as you do. But then when you meet someone from outside of your group, or from a different religion or a different religious tradition, and they say, this teaching, I don't quite understand that, could you clarify that? And then suddenly maybe you realize, yeah, that's true, that isn't quite so clear as I thought it was. So religious tradition, Buddhist tradition, is one founded on timeless truths, but the exposition of those truths, the communication of those truths, is not timeless, and it needs to adapt to changing social conditions and cultural conditions, and we have to accept if education system is promoting critical thinking skills, we can't expect there to be no-go areas. We can't expect our younger generation to be using these skills only in those areas that we're comfortable with. When they start asking questions about why do we do this, and why do we bow to Buddhism, and why do we chant, and what's the purpose of this ritual and that ritual, we must be able to explain. And if we can't explain, if we have to say, well, we just do it because we've always done it that way, then I think we're in a dangerous situation. So I believe it's really inherent, intrinsic in a living tradition, and particularly in our Buddhist tradition, that we're constantly re-evaluating, we're looking again and again at the way that we do things, and the way, particularly in the way that we communicate these teachings, and the way that we can uplift and inspire people to carry on this wonderful tradition into the future, irrespective of what changes may go on in the external world. So the Buddha's teaching is based upon the recognition and the study of nature, and which is essentially the study of change. And what are the causes and conditions that underlie change, both positive change and progress, and negative change and decline. It's only when we really can grasp those underlying principles of progress and decline, both individually in our private life and in our lives as families, communities, as the society, as a culture, that we can be confident that we can arrest or reduce the factors producing decline, and we can promote those factors creating progress. So the faith that is questioned and which welcomes challenge and sees it's a healthy thing. It's like if you're having a very vigorous massage. You know, if you're being massaged and then you don't feel anything, and then suddenly there's a place where you're being managed and it actually hurts. You say, yeah, that's the point. That's the yes, massage there. You see, you actually want it to be massaged at the bit that hurts. You know, it's not so useful to be massaged on all the bits that don't hurt, because that's not where the problem is. So there's always going to be a certain amount of friction when there's challenge, but that's how something grows and develops, I think. Now, so what is the object of faith in Buddhism? Buddhism is not a historical religion. Some religions rise and fall on whether or not you're willing to believe that certain things happened 2,000 years ago. And in Buddhism, there is a key event, at least in the Theravada narrative, the enlightenment of the Buddha. Now, in the Theravada tradition, one area in which it differs somewhat is of its vision of understanding of Buddhahood and the nature of the Buddha. So I'm giving a Theravada view here. The Theravada view is that we believe that the prince, Siddhartha, was a very special human being, in that he had over a course of many, many lifetimes, millions of lifetimes, been gradually accumulating all the spiritual perfections, or parami. And the last lifetime was the culmination of this training and education over such a unimaginably long period of time. But even though he had, in many lifetimes, in many forms, in many realms, been accumulating these perfections, his last life was as a human being. And his enlightenment took place in a human birth. And so the enlightenment of the Buddha was the enlightenment of a human being, albeit a very special human being, but he was a human being at that time. And so the lesson, or the principle that we derive from this is that at the moment of his enlightenment, the Buddha demonstrated that the potential for enlightenment. So he was enlightened as a human being, but through that enlightenment, he revealed the human capacity for enlightenment. And so this is our faith as Buddhists. We believe that the Buddha was enlightened, and we can't prove that, can we? But we believe the Buddha was enlightened, and that through his enlightenment he proved the human capacity for enlightenment. He was, as it were, a representative of the human race. And the next and crucial step for all of us is that if we have that confidence and belief in the inherent human capacity for enlightenment, then we have to have that inherent, firm belief in our own inherent capacity for enlightenment. So we say, well, that's a faith, but this is the come and see teaching, the put it to the test teaching. And so if we are sincere in our faith, we have to put that faith to the test. Now, most objects of faith, you can't put them to the test. Like I always say with most things, do you believe that this happened or that happened as it's portrayed in holy books? You either believe it or you don't. If you believe it, you can be a member of that religion. If you don't, you can't. But if our guiding principle of faith as a Buddhist is our capacity for enlightenment, which means our capacity to abandon the unwholesome, to develop the wholesome, and to purify our minds, then we need to put that to the test and make efforts in our lives to make use of various spiritual teachings, techniques the Buddha gives us to try to abandon all that is unwholesome in our lives, to try to cultivate and nourish all that is wholesome, and to purify the mind. And so in our daily life, wherever we may be, at home, at work, in a monastery or out in the nature, we can always be doing this work. We can always be making the effort to protect our mind against the unwholesome that's not yet arisen, to reduce, eliminate the unwholesome that has arisen, to bring into our minds all the wholesome qualities not yet arisen, and to systematically and conscientiously cultivate and further develop all the wholesome that has developed. And so we can be proving moment by moment, day by day, the article of the object of our faith, which is this capacity for change. And the change takes place essentially through our effort. And the Buddha said this is you've probably heard the teaching Theravada, but there's another phrase the Buddha used to refer to his teaching. He says this is Viryavada, which means it's a teaching of effort. It means that effort is meaningful. Effort has results and consequences. And that we take our stand on effort, and we seek to be self-reliant more and more, and to take responsibility more and more. And I was yesterday. I was talking. We had some discussion, and I was giving some reflections on prayer, and I mentioned that my own personality is one which I've always tried to be as independent as I could, at least emotionally, spiritually independent. And as an adolescent, I would never take money from my parents, and I just liked the feeling of that the money I had in my pocket when I go out with my friends was money that I'd earned myself. And I think this is a very common feeling, isn't it? If you achieve something through your own efforts, there's a far better feeling than if it's provided for you. If any of you have built your own house, for instance, it's a wonderful feeling to be able to create a space for yourself and your family that you made through your own efforts, through your own sweat and hard work. And we could also talk about pilgrimage. There are holy sites in almost all religions, and a pilgrimage is a common theme in the religious history of mankind. But the most important parts of pilgrimage is not actually arriving at the pilgrimage spot, at the holy site. It's all the difficulties and the struggles of getting there. So, if you were going on a pilgrimage to a holy site or a holy mountain or a holy lake, or to pay respects to holy relics or whatever, And let's say you had the choice of walking or going in the traditional style, or maybe someone giving you a lift in a helicopter to within 100 meters of the holy site. Certainly going in the helicopter would be much more comfortable and time efficient and pleasant in many ways, but I think that very few people with any kind of religious sensibility would prefer to go by helicopter, because the whole point is the struggle and the difficulties. And I think that there are, I certainly believe that there are many beneficent deities and powerful figures in other realms which may be able to provide some support in our efforts in life. But the question is more, to what extent do we draw upon that support? I sometimes speaking with people in Thailand who bow to deities or make requests for this and for that kind of worldly success. And I said, is this ethical? I said, what you're basically doing is you're requesting powerful beings in other realms to assist you to have an unfair advantage over other people. Because if there are a number of different people who all want the same thing, only one person can get that thing, and you're getting help from a deity, is that fair if the other people aren't? And also, if a deity, let's just say for the sake of argument, has the power to provide that kind of extra boost, but he's only going to give it to somebody who makes offerings to him, isn't that what we call corruption? Aren't you supporting a corrupt system? You're corrupting deities only to help people who give them offerings. I think there's food for thought in this whole kind of view. And as I say, I think this is a wonderful feeling when it's not that I'm a self-made man or anyone. I think that's a very foolish way, because together with and complementing this love of taking responsibility and working things out for yourself and putting in the effort yourself, which I feel is very ennobling. This is balanced by, tempered by the cultivation of gratitude and the recognition of all that is given to us. Now, I speak to school children and I say, you may think you're very smart, you're very intelligent and you don't need anybody, but when you think about things in a very smart way, what is the tool that you're using for analysis and for coming up with new ideas? It's language, isn't it? And were you born with language? Did you make that up yourself? No, you learnt it from your parents. And if people can make a go in the world without sight, without hearing, people with various disabilities and difficulties can overcome those difficulties under certain circumstances. But someone who has no language can't function at all. And so one of the greatest gifts that we have is a gift of language, and it's our parents that teach us that. Quite apart from the fact that if our parents didn't care for us and look after us when we were small, we wouldn't be here anyway, we'd be dead by now. We differ from most animals. Animals, generally their life is an instinctive one, and perhaps within a few hours or a few days they've learned everything they need for the rest of their life. They don't need their parents anymore. But human beings, we're rather weak in many ways. Our faculties, our sight, our hearing, our sense of smell, our physical dexterity is not particularly impressive. And we have to learn. And this is why I was saying just now that learning and the capacity to learn is our most essential human quality. And is there anything, that good and wonderful in our lives that we don't owe a debt of gratitude to somebody or other, or what's our debt of gratitude to worms, earthworms? Yeah, huge, absolutely huge. Because if earthworms weren't eating the soil and digesting the soil, we wouldn't be able to grow any crops. We'd all go hungry and die. Our debt of gratitude to bees, pollinating flowers. When we start to open up and not trying to sort of develop some kind of New Age emotion about this, but just recognizing the fact that to what extent we are indebted to teachers and parents and friends and even the animal world and the natural world. And so at the same time, as we're making this effort to take more and more responsibility for ourselves and finding ways of understanding nature and to be working with the nature of things and to be strengthening and developing our minds, then to the extent that we are consciously aware of the gratitude of our gratitude to others, then I think we can be on the right path. Now, in one of his first discourses, the Buddha summarized his teachings. This was a talk he gave to fully enlightened arahants, so it wasn't a teaching of things that they needed to learn. So they'd already graduated. But he wanted to summarize a sort of bullet point discourse so that these arahants going off in all the different parts of India would be able to teach something which was more or less harmonious. So the Buddha said, what is the goal of Buddhist practice? It's nibbana, it's complete and utter liberation from suffering and its causes, and the maximization of all the virtuous qualities, wisdom, compassion, purity. He said, what is the primary, the number one engine, or the causal condition for the realization of nibbana? Now many people might think, well, inner peace or vipassana or whatever, but the virtue that the Buddha chose in this seminal discourse was patient endurance. And a wonderful gloss on this given by one of my teachers, Ajahn Jayasaro. He says, what is this kanti, or what we call patient endurance? He says, it is peaceful coexistence with the unpleasant. So sometimes when we talk about being patient or enduring, then we have this idea of gritting our teeth. Just be patient, just stay with it. But this is a peaceful coexistence with it. The recognition of the fact that in our life, no matter how privileged we might be, how wealthy we might be, how much we can manipulate conditions around us, we're always going to have to deal with the unpleasant on one level or another. And it is the primary condition for all the development of all the other spiritual virtues. When I first went to Thailand in late 70s, conditions were pretty ascetic, and my teacher, Ajahn Chah, was still quite healthy, reasonably healthy in those days, and he would give very long discourses, maybe 3 hours at a time, and the hall was rather kind of stuffy, and it's a concrete. It wasn't very beautiful, the hall we sit in those days. It was like a concrete box, and the windows, small windows with bars on them. And one of my friends says it's the Mexican prison school of architecture. And we used to sit on these concrete floors without any kind of mats. And there's a great deal of protocol and etiquette involved in monastic training in northeast Thailand. And there's only a certain posture you're allowed to sit in. You can't sit, it's very impolite to sit cross-legged in front of a teacher in Thailand. You have this, I don't know if anyone's seen the way the Thai people sit, the polite posture. It's kind of side saddle kind of posture. And if you've never sat in it before, it feels really unbalanced and awkward. but that's the only way you're allowed to sit. So you're sitting in this heat and you start to sweat and the mosquitoes are coming, and you're sitting on this hard concrete floor for 2 and 3 hours with having to sit in this way that you've never sat before. And you very soon realize, that you're only going to survive if you can be really patient with this, not fight it. And you see, one of the disadvantages of a good education is that your ability to rationalize desires is very sophisticated. Myself and my friends from around the world, most of us middle class, reasonably well educated, and our Thai colleagues, mostly from rice farming backgrounds. And so it's very, we suffer similarly, but the Westerners would be the ones that always had, all these good reasons why we shouldn't be doing it like this. It would be much better if we did it like that, for this reason, that reason. It's so reasonable, and but then we realized actually that our Thai friends were suffering a lot less because they didn't get into all this kind of realm of how things could be better than they are. Well, they were like this, and it was our job as young monks to put up with it. And in fact, I believe, my memory tells me that the first Thai word I can remember learning, I listened to these long discourses and asked this American monk, I said, can you give me some kind of what is this word? I keep hearing this word otton all the time. What does that mean? And he said, that means patient endurance. I realized that's what my teacher was stressing again and again. And it's noticeable, isn't it, these days, that patient endurance and patience is not a virtue that we uphold very much. In fact, in many ways, progress is seen as the ability to live your life without the need for patience. Where instant access, instant gratification is a sign of progress. So if you see these days, if people had high-speed Wi-Fi internet access, and then for some reason they go somewhere and they have to use a dial-up, and they have to wait for like 2 seconds before the screen comes up, and they're always sort of tapping their fingers, and oh dear, this is so slow, and how standards change in that way. And I think it's important in spiritual training, any kind of education, they're actually saying, no, this is actually very good, and just being willing to be peaceful with something which is not immediately gratifying. It's an essential element of a mature mind. If we can only be comfortable with things that we enjoy or are fun, immediately give us that kind of hit, then we're shutting ourselves away from whole areas of life which demand that kind of application, willingness to persevere and to bear with a certain amount of discomfort. And this isn't a kind of no pain, no gain teaching, but it's saying that is a certain element of life which we have to be able to open up to and to deal with and to accept. So the Buddhist teaching founded upon the transformational teaching founded upon patience, but another key teaching and virtue, of course, is mindfulness and the ability to be present to our experience. What is really shocking, if we turn the light within, is to see what a mess our minds are and how totally out of control they are. And I think we need, for a certain modicum of self-respect, to consider ourselves as being very, basically rational beings. And when you look at your mind directly, then you see, wow, there's so much that's irrational and contradictory, and pointless and harmful, and this is going on, and I never really noticed that before, never really observed it before. So this mindfulness is the effort to wake up to what's really going on in our lives. Not what we think it is, what we'd like it to be, or the images and the projections, but just right down to what's actually going on right now. And what's most crucial here is the interest is happiness, pleasure, and pain or suffering. Because even though we have the most wise social system and cultural system, economic system, and this gross national happiness is surely the most intelligent macro idea is around in the world these days. But at the same time, we have to humbly acknowledge that our ideas and understanding of the nature of happiness and the nature of suffering is still very superficial, and that once the external supportive conditions are in place, the internal work has to be done as well. And this observation, you can keep coming back to this awareness of right now. How do you feel? How do you feel right now? Just for you can do this as a daily exercise with your watch. Throughout every 15 minutes throughout the day, just look at your watch and say, how do I feel right now? This is a mindfulness exercise. And you can start to cut through, a lot of received ideas that we absorb without recognizing. I was speaking to someone last evening, and they're saying, the society now has become so materialistic. And I said, well, actually, I think it's not materialistic enough. And the person I was speaking to was quite shocked. They never thought a monk would say such a thing, that the society is not materialistic enough. I said, no, I think society is not very materialistic. For instance, let's say a wealthy woman, lots of disposable income, going to buy a handbag. Now, if you were a materialist, you would say, what do I need this handbag for? What am I going to carry around in this handbag? What is the sturdiest material that this handbag can make? The most reasonable color and the most aesthetically pleasing. And then you would find the sort of optimum handbag and buy it, irrespective of price. The cheaper the better. But in fact, wealthy women spend huge sums of money buying bags which are materially not particularly special, but because they have the name of a brand on it, they consider that's worth the extra expense. Now, I think that if you're paying a huge extra sum of money merely for the brand name, you're not a materialist. You're not expecting some kind of material bonus there. You want to be part of that elite group of people that have enough money to have that kind of handbag. And one of the comments about sensual pleasures and the world of consumer goods is that if you look very clearly, it's not just that you have that thing and that pleasure, but it's that large numbers of people don't have it. That's the hook there. If everybody was to have it, would it be so wonderful? If everybody, had the same kind of brand name handbag, would it be so interesting anymore? And one interesting study they've done in England, I think, is they gave people in offices this question. Let's say you had a choice that the company was to raise your wages. Let's say, I can't remember the figures now, let's just say for the sake of argument, the company's going to raise your wage by £50 a week, and it's going to raise the wage of everybody else in the office by £100 a week. That's the first choice. Second choice is the company will raise your wage by £30 a week and everybody else's by £20 a week. Which would you choose? And many people, majority of people, choose the second option, which from mainstream economics doesn't make sense, because instead of accepting £50, you're only expecting £30, £20 less than you might make. But the feeling that you're only making £50 more and everybody else is £100 more is just so unbearable that people would like to just take the £30 instead. And so, if we were really as materialistic and say, we're not. We're a mass of contradictions, and we often act in very irrational ways. And some of that irrationality is just a function of the way the brain works. But a lot of it is just because we haven't really seen the extent to which we're not really awake and aware to what's going on within us sufficiently to make wise decisions. So this is the Buddhist training, as I say, is not one of acceptance of dogmas, but using the Buddhist teachings as tools to create more understanding and direct awareness of what's going on, particularly what truly makes us happy, what truly makes us sad. And we can, if you practice present moment mindfulness, then you can find happiness in the most unexpected places. And you see that it's the quality of mind that you bring to activities which counts almost more than anything else in deciding the quality of your life. Because generally we prioritize our activities in the sense that we feel certain things are just like things we have to do every day, and we just get them over and done with as quickly as possible so we can go on to the more important things. And so this is why often we just feel so rushed all the time, because I'm going to do this so I can do that, and I do that I can do this, or else try and do 2 or 3 things at once. You give it a fancy title like multitasking, when in fact you're just confusing yourself and making yourself more run down and stressed out than you need to. And so the Buddha is saying, giving respect and interest to every single action in your life. So in a sort of more Zen idiom, you say, when you're having a shower, just have a shower. Experience what it is to have a shower. When you're brushing your teeth, where's your mind usually when you're brushing your teeth? Is it with what you're doing in the present moment, or is it off somewhere else? When you're walking up and down stairs, standing in the lift, all these short periods of time which we just write off as sort of in-between times in our life, you can reclaim those, recycle them, and use those periods of time not just to be going over what happened just now, or going over again and again what's going to happen, or you think is going to happen a bit later on. Just take a few breaths and just be here now, as they used to say, just be right here. And can find that chores and things which are so kind of boring and that used to fill you with aversion, things like cleaning jobs and washing the dishes and washing clothes and doing mundane jobs. If you bring a certain quality of interest and awareness to doing that in the best way you can, with that sense of respect for whatever is your present occupation, you bring a new quality to your life. And that starts to spread into other areas and human relationships, communication. Now, how few people know how to listen to other people? Have you had that? I'm sure, you're speaking to someone and you just get this sense of a little bit of tension in the other person. You realize they're just waiting for you to stop so that they can say what they want to say. Or you open your heart to someone and you tell them, and instead of simply you get, yeah, something like that happened to me once, and then they're off into their own autobiography again, and it's usually chapters of the autobiography you've heard many times before, and you all know almost by heart. And so the ability to listen and truly listen to both the content of what someone's saying and the feelings behind it. So a life skill that very few people apply themselves to, unfortunately. And this is part of Dhamma practice. So if you think Dhamma practice means going off into a cave or a monastery and many hours a day with your eyes closed and developing meditative skills and visions and all this kind of thing, well, there's certainly spending time alone and learning to enjoy being by yourself is a very important part of life. But it doesn't mean that when you're in a busy world with a lot of responsibilities and a lot of activities that you can't practice. You adapt your practice. So if you have to go into a meeting and one which promises to be full of some dissension, then you say, what is the Dhamma practice that I can develop in this situation? Oh, well, right speech. Learning to listen to people I don't like a little bit better, not interrupting them, not shutting them off, shutting them out, not taking sides, not being judgmental. There's so many different skills that can be developed in any situation at all. So when you have some spare time, nothing going on, you can sit, meditate with your eyes closed. But if you think, I can't practice these days, there's too many things going on. No, that's not at all what the practice is about. There's this constant sense, we can always, when you have this sense of, I'm a learner, I'm learning, I'm studying, I'm learning from experience, then there's always something. Every day you feel you've made a profit, as it were. I've been speaking for quite a long time now. Just so many things to talk about. One thing is when we talk about happiness, a big topic in Bhutan, of course. This last point I'd like to make is that your appreciation and the happiness that you derive from life is dependent upon education. Let me give a very simple example. I remember as a school child and going on school trips to art galleries and walking around art galleries. I can remember some of the most boring time in my life walking around art galleries as a schoolboy, and then finally someone, kind teacher, is standing in front of a great painting and explaining why this is a masterpiece. And just with the untutored eye, there's no way that you can just pick that up naturally, or maybe some great geniuses can, but I certainly couldn't. But then when this teacher started to explain all the various techniques that are involved and why this particular color was just so incredible, and this relationship and the composition and suddenly my appreciation and my enjoyment and the happiness that I derived from going to art galleries increased exponentially. And we all start off, with instincts. We're animals. We all have it, and we don't need any kind of education or training to enjoy a beautiful object. A man sees a woman sees a man. Immediate instinctive enjoyment can take place. So you hear music. You don't need to pop music, the most basic kind of music. You don't need any kind of real education to enjoy it. So we have this kind of instinctive pleasures that are just part and parcel of being human. But if we educate ourselves, then our tastes become more refined and more sophisticated, and certain things that we used to enjoy maybe are not so enjoyable anymore. And with spiritual training and Buddhist practice, then certain things that we used to enjoy, we don't enjoy so much. But that, and from the outside, you thought, wow, oh, you're a monk, you're a celibate monk, you only eat one meal a day, you live in a forest, well, that must be, how do you manage to live that? Whereas monks think, oh, those people, they live in cities and they're always racing around and doing this, how do they bear that, so a very different kind of perspective. But for those looking at monks, all you see is all the things that monks don't have. But of course you can't see the compensations and the other kinds of happiness that take their place. And there is this kind of replacement. And so in any community or a society, a culture, where they say gross national happiness is a goal, and then we, at the same time, we have to be educating people's sense, or those things which create happiness in people. One of the key ones is the joy of understanding, the happiness that arises when you understand something that you didn't understand before, when you can express some skill, you develop some ability that you didn't have before. That's not something that comes naturally, is it? But through training, then you can find that the joy of doing a good job is more important to you than the wage. At the end, you still need a wage, of course, to look after yourself and your family. But the joy of doing a good job is far more intense than the expectation of the money at the end. And so instilling or inculcating in children this, how pleasurable it is to learn. And in our Buddhist schools in Thailand, I encourage teachers, when you're with children, and when suddenly they work something out, and they say, oh yes, now I see, and then ask the child, how does that feel? Look, how does that feel when you understand something you didn't understand, or you gain some new knowledge? It feels great, doesn't it? And you need to constantly be reminding children, or allowing children to notice that, and then they begin to see, yes, that pleasure and happiness doesn't come from buying things and consuming things alone, but from this inner growth and understanding. And how does it feel when you share something with someone compared with how you feel when you just eat it or you consume it alone? Look at the feeling. This isn't a spiritual teaching, you should not be selfish, you should be unselfish. But it's saying that unselfishness makes you happier than selfishness does. It's the most rational and intelligent way of living your life. Sharing is more intelligent than keeping things for yourself. Being kind is more intelligent than being unkind. And so this is, I think, the grounds for optimism, that goodness and virtue and kindness, these are not just sort of ideals and things. We should be like that way, but we can develop those qualities and they make us happy. So we need to be elevating our idea of happiness, otherwise it can just be drawn into this whole consumer religion, and that's spreading throughout the world. So we want more and more happiness, so we need more and more of this consumer good and more of that consumer good. So an education not of those things that give us happiness, but an education of our faculty for happiness, I think is something that the Buddhist tradition really has a great deal to offer. So thank you for your patience in listening to such a long discourse, and now I think there's opportunity for anyone who would like to ask any questions or bring anything up for discussion.
Thank you very much, Ajahn, for a very lovely discourse. So part of your talk, you kind of talked about the disadvantages of elite education, or just an education, over-education in general. And so part of my education, part of my Western upbringing, has kind of inculcated this preoccupation with justice, in the form of eradication of poverty, reduction of inequality, something that's very, I think, much in discussion today, especially with all the crises that are going on, which on the one hand seems incompatible with Buddhist practice, but on the other hand seems very compatible in the illuminations.
In what ways do you find it incompatible?
Well, I guess just in the kind of clinging way, like you're clinging for you have certain expectations, and I guess certain emotions can arise when decision makers, especially in the U.S., are just very, I guess, stubborn in their ways. So I'm wondering how Buddhist practice can be used in the service of a vision of justice.
Yes, I think
a more just society.
It's not really. Well, the transmission of Buddhism to the West has been rather, in many cases, rather reductionist, and certain elements of Buddhist tradition taken out of context and practiced in isolation, which has led to a number of misunderstandings, I think, of Buddhism. The Buddha taught about what we call the Four Requisites. And the Four Requisites are adequate clothing, adequate nutrition, food, adequate shelter, and adequate medicine. And the Buddha said that those are like bottom line, that unless a human being can be free of anxiety and worry about those basic physical needs for clothing, food, shelter, medicine, that the higher levels of the training, meditation and all these things won't ever be any effective. You're not in a space in which you can benefit from the higher teachings unless you have an adequate supply of basic physical needs. But at the same time, there's this sort of teaching of contentment, and it's asking yourself, well, how much is enough? And interestingly, the last few years, I've seen a number of studies where they've tried to correlate income levels to happiness or perceived happiness levels. I don't know if you've come across any of these. So you have this, and it really is very much in consonant with the Buddhist teaching that if you're very, very poor and you still lack these basic needs, then for every increase in income of $1 a day or whatever it might be, there's a significant increase in the sense of well-being. But then you reach a point of a certain number of, depending on which country you live in and so on and so forth, a certain level, and then after that there's almost no increase in happiness levels at all. So the difference between an income of, I think in the States, something, I don't know, $50,000 a year or something. After that, from $200,000, $1 million, there's no perceivable increase in happiness. So it's not saying everything's in the mind, don't worry about the body, it's all karma. No, not at all. And one famous occasion in the Buddha's lifetime is first thing in the morning when the Buddha awoke from his rest, he'd meditate and he'd use his psychic powers to see who within the immediate area, or sometimes tens of kilometers away, had the ripe spiritual faculties and with just the right teaching could realize a state of enlightenment. And then the Buddha would set off and walk there in order to give a talk, perhaps to just one individual. And in one case, he realized that there was a particular individual who was ready and ripe for spiritual enlightenment. And he arrived at the local town where this man lived. And everybody was very excited. All the local dignitaries came out, the whole town, all the merchants, the wealthy people, and all very excited. The Buddha came all this way to give them a talk. But the one man that he'd really determined to teach was a very poor cowherd, and it just so happened that one of his cows ran away, and so he'd spent the whole day chasing around the hills trying to gather up these cows. So by the time he arrived, the Buddha had already been sitting there for a long time. Everybody's getting a little bit restless. And this poor man wanders in, and he's totally exhausted. And the Buddha says, please take this man away and give him something to eat. And when he's had something to eat and he sat down, then I'll give my talk. And everybody's like, who is this guy? So, he's just a cowherd. And so after he'd had some rest and refreshment, he listened, and then he realized enlightenment. And so this is one incident in the Buddha's life, but it's often used as an example that the Buddha's very down-to-earth recognition that if you're completely exhausted and you're hungry, even with the spiritual faculties primed, you're not going to be able to receive the Dhamma as it should be received. And there are many teachings, particularly in the Anguttara Nikaya, which deal with these kind of topics, and that the Buddha's saying that it is the duty of the monarch or the government to help poor people and to create a society in which everyone has access to these basic needs. In terms of modern political theory, this would be very much more sort of a government taking responsibility to make sure that nobody falls below the poverty line and supporting them, and that's the duty and responsibility of leaders to do that, and for other more wealthy members of society to assist. And he said the society as a whole will only be healthy when that effort is being made. And so one of my teachers, he speaking on this topic, he said that if you want to gauge the success of an economy in Buddhist terms, you don't look at the number of millionaires, you look at the number of poor people lacking the four requisites. So if you're in a situation where the number of millionaires is irrelevant, it's not like everyone should be on the same level, it doesn't matter, but the key point is that everybody in a society ideally has access to the four requisites. So in that sense I would say that like social justice on that level is key to the Buddha's vision of a Buddhist society and development on the macro level as opposed to the individual level. Something that is a little shocking thing I say sometimes in public arenas in Thailand is that one of the key problems we have is the assumption that this is a Buddhist nation. Now, Thailand is a very proud Buddhist nation. I said, well, by what criteria would you say it's a Buddhist nation? And that it's precisely because we assume we're a Buddhist nation that we don't ever really deal with many problems, or you get many people saying, God, how is this possible in a Buddhist country, and it's like this and it's like that. But I'm saying, I don't think that there's such a good case for saying that Thailand is a Buddhist nation, but what I would say is that it has an incredible potential to be one. And I think that you compare this with certain countries in the West, America or Britain, is such proud of being one of the great democratic countries, that all the ways in which it lacks democracy are often overlooked, because there's this concept we are a democracy. And I think in Buddhist countries, the non-Buddhist or the un-Buddhist or the elements are often overlooked. They become blind spots because there is assumption, well, we're Buddhist, and as we're Buddhist, then this is Buddhist. But it's not always the case. So one of the key sort of fundamental teachings of Buddhism is, you do good and you get good results, and you do bad and you get bad results. So I said one measure of a Buddhist society, we could say, a very simple measure, is do most of the people, when they look around and they see the political world, the social world, and how things are conducted in this country, do people say, well, you know, at the end of the day, yes, in Thailand, most of the people who do good get good results, and most of the people who do bad get bad results. And if, you know, majority of people say, no, I don't see that, then I say, then I think we've got a serious problem as a Buddhist culture, Buddhist society.
Thank you very much. Your teaching's been very inspiring. I don't know if the mic is working, but I'm loud. Thank you very much. The teaching's been very inspiring. In your talk, you mentioned about the place of men and women in Buddhism, saying that human life has the ability to achieve enlightenment, which is true for both men and women. If that is the case, I would like to refer to the Vinaya vows, maybe from Theravada perspective. I may be wrong, but I read in literature stating that monks have 250 vows and nuns have 300 vows, which is 50 more vows. Why is it so? What's the rationale for that? If Buddhism is found on timeless truth, why is it so? What are the social underpinnings, social and cultural underpinnings that's undermining nuns' place in Buddhist society or Buddhist monastic society?
Yeah, this is a huge topic. I'll try to just make a few pertinent comments. Firstly, the Buddhist monks and nuns, the discipline is not restricted to what we call the Patimokkha precepts, 227 for monks, 300 plus for nuns. In fact, there are thousands, literally thousands of rules. And so there are what we call rules within the Patimokkha and rules outside of the Patimokkha. And many of the rules, regulations that we observe in daily life are not actually included within those 227. And a number of those 227 rules are no longer apply because of changes in society over the past 2,000 years. But the idea of these precepts are that they are what I call pegs for mindfulness. They're training, both the inner training of mindfulness and the outer training to create a harmony and uniformity and of view and conduct. The Buddha didn't set out, he didn't write this disciplinary code. It was created ad hoc, which means that as a certain problem arose in the monks' community, then the Buddha would call a meeting and he would say, in future, this is not allowed, and if a monk was to act in this way or speak in this way, it would be considered an offence against the discipline of this category or that category, this level or that level. And so the 227 rules and so on, merely the fact that there were like 227, it's a little bit more complex than that. Basically, there were that many occasions and problems that arose, and the Buddha chose to deal with them in that way by laying down training rules. Whereas for the women, there were more occasions and more problems, slightly more, and certainly given position of women in society in India in those days, and there were certain extra rules to, for instance, to try to ensure their safety and their, the integrity of their training. Now the nuns' order, I think by most conventional standards, would say was a great success. I mean, I can't think of few other institutions that lasted 1,000 years. But now, speaking with hindsight from 2,500 years, it's a long time since this order disappeared. Now, in the Theravada school, the Vinaya discipline is like, it's like a legal system. And some of the most complex and precise regulations are concerned with ordination procedure, because this is where the whole longevity of the sasana is determined by the perceived legitimacy of the ordination. And so there are a great many rules about the kind of place and the boundaries and the fine points of the procedure, all of which have to be followed to the letter. And as with any kind of culture or any kind of legal system, to someone outside of it, it can seem kind of a bit ridiculous sometimes. I was in Sri Lanka a few years ago, and one of the allowed areas or places in which an ordination can take place is on on an island or a floating object like a boat or a building, which has to be completely surrounded by water. And in one of the strictest sects in Sri Lanka some years ago, for some reason they suddenly, oh my God, not oh my God, but the Buddhist equivalent of oh my God, they realized that there'd been a rope from this ordination platform in the middle of an artificial lake, joining it to the shore. And that rope invalidated all the ordinations that had taken place since that rope had been there, because it's no longer separated from the land. This rope joins it. And so monks all over Sri Lanka who are living in their monasteries and temples got letters from the administrative body saying, I'm sorry, you're not really a monk, because your ordination was not legitimate, because there was a rope joining the ordination hall to the shore. So this is a little bit of context. Now with the nun's ordination, the ordination procedure is that there's a two-tier process by which the nun joins, applies and is accepted into the order of nuns. And then, having been accepted into the order of nuns, the nun now enters into the assembly of monks, and the same procedure is followed more or less. And this is like a rubber stamping, just an acknowledgement from the monks that the nun has been legitimately ordained. Now, from the Orthodox Theravada point of view, these days, if we're going to revive, and there's many people would like to revive this order, the problem is that there is not a bhikkhuni community in which a new nun can join. And so the ordination procedure cannot proceed, because a nun must join a pre-existing nun's community. Now, within the context of Buddhist monastic culture, this is a really weighty objection. But for those outside of that, and the accusations, particularly amongst many scholars and women in the West particularly, is that the monks just want to maintain their position and their power and their influence, and they're just trying to make excuses or quoting technicalities. So you see, the question to which a legal procedure and the legitimacy of a legal procedure is just a petty technicality, and the extent to which it is a very important point and objection. This is primarily a cultural conflict, and one this is going on at the present moment. I think that there is room for some compromise, and so I know mostly about the situation in Thailand, and one possible way out of this is that, well, one is to create a new nuns institution in which it tries to create all of the supportive conditions which would enable women to lead monastic life, and would receive the respect of the society, but one in which just not called a bhikkhuni. It doesn't have the full status or the name of the bhikkhuni, but practically speaking, one's living in the way that a bhikkhuni would live, in all the most important ways. So then that means that you don't have this whole problem about the legitimacy of the ordination procedure. The other possibility is that given that there's an unbroken bhikkhuni tradition in some Mahayana Buddhist countries, particularly say Taiwan, that women could become bhikkhunis, and are these days becoming bhikkhunis in Taiwan, and then returning to Thailand and living in all practical terms as a Theravada nun, but strictly speaking, conventionally speaking, legally speaking, a Mahayana nun. You see, so my own view and something that I've spoken to senior monks in Thailand is, we have to be if we say that we just can't, we don't feel we have the authority to override things that are laid down by the Lord Buddha himself, because we feel it would be a good idea, or it would be just and a right thing to do. And so we don't feel we're confident enough that, that we have the authority to do that. At the very least, we must be recognizing that many women have a monastic vocation, and we should be trying to create an institution and conditions which would most fully support that vocation, even if we can't, technically speaking, go back to the time of the Buddha. But again, it has to be acknowledged that even at the time of the Buddha, there wasn't an equality between the Bhikkhu Sangha and the Bhikkhuni Sangha, and many of the Western women wanted sort of complete equality, but that certainly was never the case. And I think that in Western countries also there's a very naive or lack of understanding of the way that hierarchy can work well, given the appropriate checks and balances, and also that the model that we have in the order between the Bhikkhu Sangha and Bhikkhuni Sangha was like elder brother and younger sister. So it wasn't like, one over the top of the other, but so in family-based cultures, like in Thailand or in most of Asia, that kind of model and that kind of relationship of elder brother, younger sister is one that people really resonate with. But in Western countries, seniority of siblings almost has no meaning at all, and that responsibilities of elder siblings to youngers and that kind of relationship is not a model that people can really appreciate or understand at all. So there are a lot, as I say, I think a lot of this is a lot of cultural understanding, and something that we need to talk and to explain to each other. But I think that for monks, we feel like the well has been poisoned already. That's to say that the idea out there is that monks are chauvinist and misogynist and power hungry, and they just want to maintain the status quo. And so that any kind of argument that's made by monks is perceived within that frame generally. And here they go again, trying to make excuses. So this is one of the big issues in Buddhist world at the moment, as you probably know.
Just quickly, in relation with that, did Buddha ever take a female form in his past couple of lives that he came? Were there any incident that Buddha came in the form of female birth, a woman's birth?
I can't remember that ever happening. No. Yeah.
Thank you for your great talk today. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm from Japan, and here I'm working for some GNHC policy. So modernization and development helps meeting the basic needs of the people. In that sense, it will fulfilling the prerequisites you talked about. But at the same time, this development is increasing inequality. So the satisfaction of the people who have and who have not may be increasing. So I wonder, from the Buddhism point of view, in order to pursue GNH, what's the priority or the thinking the policymakers should have? Is it to try to maintain the equality or some other thoughts?
Yeah, this is kind of the main kind of point of conflict, isn't it, in development throughout the world, and the current model of development is one which very clearly inequality increases as a byproduct of that kind of development, and so there are pros and cons, and many economists and thinkers would say, well, you just have to accept that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. And that will, I think, depend on criteria. I think from my discussions and from what I understand of the G&H program, that it's not a completely unrealistic program, or the very fact that you're here working in the way you do shows that, but that it has to be tempered and balanced, and this is the role of the government. I mean, we've had this, it's almost been like a religious movement for 20, 30 years, this idea that there is this magical, mystical power in the universe called free markets, and that, if all you have to do is get the government out of the way, and suddenly this kind of God called free market will just work everything out in the best possible way. And I don't think that view can stand up very well these days. And I think people, with the obviously with the collapse of huge economic disasters of the past few years, taken away a lot of that kind of arrogant self-confidence in people who are promoting free market solutions to development problems. My own, I'm not an economist, and I have a probably superficial understanding of these things, but what I do, the point I have made is I think there is often a confusion of ends and means. So when people talk about a growth of the development of an economy, often they take the percentage increase of gross national product, and say, oh, this country is doing much better than that country because they grew by 5% and this country only grew by 3%, or and China grew by 10%, and just this assumption that the more you grow, the better it is. Whereas I think that the growth is an index, it's a means to, it should be a means towards an end. And I think this is the question that that most places are not asking even, and Bhutan is, well, in the end, what is economics for? Surely economics is for people, not people for economics. And so only when we can decide upon certain goals for realistic goals, and whether we articulate that as happiness or whatever, and then we have some idea of to what degree do we want this kind of development, this kind of investment, or that kind of investment, what choices. It's only when you have a goal, a clear goal, that you can make those kind of choices. Is this compatible with our ideals? What would be the impact on the environment and on the society and on the values and the culture of the country? So opening it up rather than a simple, will it mean that the gross national product increases and wages increase, and all these things are can be valuable in their own right, but they all have to be focused upon some tangible goal that we can say, yes, we are flourishing as a society. And so I think in the Western world, my own view is that when we need to look at things like the amount of crime and violence and mental disease and lifestyle aberration, obesity epidemics and all these things. These are surely expressions of an unbalanced development, and that something is radically wrong, and that we need to be looking at different models, and of course, as you know, in many places people are looking very eagerly at what's going on in Bhutan, if it's to offer some teaching and some wise reflections for people in other cultures and societies. Yeah.
I would like to thank you, or would you like to thank you for your teaching. At the beginning you mentioned that all of us have our gods on our side. That is what a personal dilemma I have, and I would like to share with you, and then you can comment on it. When we in Bhutan, or for that matter, in many parts of the world, there are different schools of teachings. And then now, of course, we have many gurus. Then, of course, every guru demands total loyalty, which I understand. If I have to transcend my conceptual mind or ego, it's essential that I do the total surrender. But however, somewhere along the line, my rational mind tells me whether the guru is taking advantage of that fact. Second is, I feel some gurus, I don't know, this is maybe my own bad emotion, thinks that maybe they're, to use the marketing concept, blocking the customers. And thirdly, that is also more real, is that we tend to focus on a particular teachings, or our loyalty to particular teachings. And then sometimes we fear even going to some other gurus or listen to their teachings also being a bit disloyal. I would like to have your comments.
Yes, this is common throughout Buddhist world, and in Thailand, and we have this kind of question and doubts. I mean, firstly, in the Theravada tradition, it's slightly different. You see, we don't have the same relationship between teacher and student. And in Theravada Buddhism, the model for the teacher is we call Kalyanamitta, or good friend. So yesterday somebody said to me, a Bhutanese person said, "Would you please be my guru? Would you please accept me?" And I said, "No, I won't be your guru, but I'll be your good friend. Is that all right? Can I be your good friend?" And one of the qualities of the good friend is that she must always be a good example. The good friend, the Buddha said, the good friend you can tell a good friend in 7 ways. A good friend is someone who inspires love and affection. If you have a good friend, you're fortunate to have such a good friend, you just like to be with them, you just feel so good when they're around, and you feel it brings out the better side of you when you're with them. Secondly, you feel inspired with respect. And thirdly, you would like to take them as your example and try to live in the way that they live. And then the good friend is someone who is very patient with your faults and your vices, is very patient in teaching you, even when he's tired or he's hungry or he's busy, then he always has time for you. And he's someone who is able to explain the Dhamma and the teachings very clearly, and even the most profound topics he can communicate to you well. And he's someone who never takes you on the wrong path. He never leads you out of the path to liberation. These are some of the ideals for the good friend. And one of there's a famous occasion in the life of the Buddha. One of his chief disciples, called Mahakassapa, and he was the disciple who was foremost in ascetic practices. He was so ascetic that even the Buddha himself, when he was an old man, the Buddha said, "Mahakassapa, you don't need to do all this anymore, okay? You're old now, you're not so healthy, you can just take it a little bit easy." This is what Buddha is saying this to, and great arahants. And Mahakassapa said, "Lord, I ask your permission to keep up these ascetic practices, not because I need them. He's an arahant already, he's fully enlightened, but in order to be a good example and an inspiration to monks of future generations." And this is a recurring principle in my tradition, that we have the idea, if someone is fully enlightened, he has no attachment, And he could do all kinds of things maybe that other people do, which would be very bad karma, but he's beyond that now. Even if he did it, it wouldn't be bad karma for him. But he still keeps all of the same ethical rules and regulations as he did when he was a young man, in order to be a good example and in order to be an inspiration to future generations. And I think that if you have teachers who follow that principle, then you can say all the students are safe. They won't be manipulated. And there are so many cases, even in Buddhist world, of Buddhist communities. I know of many in the West, particularly in America, where they had the idea, now the teacher is enlightened, you cannot hold him to the standards of conventional morality. He is beyond all that. You must believe in him. And so if he has sexual relations with his female students, or he drinks alcohol and gets drunk and all these things, yes, if this was anyone else it would be blamable, but you can't, he's beyond this. And I'm not, I'm quite willing to say, yes, maybe he is beyond it, but the effect on the people around him and on the students, it can be very bad and terrible, lasting damage. Because if you're a student with a very charismatic teacher, you're very vulnerable. And this is the challenge, the responsibility of